Okay, we left off last time at the end of chapter 15 in Mark, and we're going to just cover 16. I did want to make one mention on one of the last couple broadcasts. I mentioned that I believe that Jesus may have been crucified on a Wednesday, and it actually, if we look historically back on the Passover dates, A.D. 28 and A.D. 31, Passover did fall on a Wednesday. So those would be possibilities in the realm of when Jesus could have been crucified. I guess I would lean more towards 31. I actually looked up that on the date one time, and it would have been like April 25th of our calendar, AD 31. And I thought it was just really cool to maybe know the actual day. Anyway, might be true, might not. You don't. It's not going to affect your salvation whether you believe a certain day on that happened. But I think it lends more towards the authenticity of what Jesus actually said regarding his death and resurrection and the 3 days and 3 nights. So, Mark 16. Here it says, it starts out in verse 1, and when the Sabbath was over, and this is singular here, it's not like Matthew, when the Sabbath, but that would also apply because it could have been after the Saturday Sabbath was over. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, brought spices that they might come and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. So they come on the first day of the week, which in our thinking is what? It's Sunday, what we call Sunday, the first day of the week. So that's why we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus on that first day of the week. And they came there, and they were kind of wondering, how are we going to get into the tomb here? How can we roll the stone away? And they get there, and it's rolled away. In verse 5 it says, and entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. Well, yeah. And he said to them, do not be amazed. Well, we are amazed. But do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold, here is the place where they laid him. Interesting here, and I'll bring it up again, I'm sure, but in John, it mentions that there were 2 angels sitting in there. One at the head, where his head was, and one where his feet had been laid. And, what's interesting to me in that is that, the mercy seat, when you got you've got the Ark of the Covenant, and the mercy seat was the top of that. And on the mercy seat, there was an angel on one side, an angel on the other side, and their wings touched in the middle. And I think it was somewhat picturesque, a picture of Jesus where he was laid was the mercy seat, where the sacrifice was made, was laid out. His dead body was laid there. Kind of a picture. But anyway, here it just talks about the one angel who was doing the talking. He said, and he goes on and says, go tell, verse 7, go tell his disciples and Peter. Now, it's interesting, Peter's singled out here, but, this is Mark's account, and Mark was, close to Peter, and it could be just partly that, or the fact that, Peter, is he really a disciple right now? The last thing he did was deny Jesus, and so, but, and Jesus is probably the very thing that he specifies here, and Peter, or the angel says, and Peter, that kind of should be a reassurance to Peter that he's in the group again. He says he's going before you into Galilee, which Jesus told him he would. There you will see him just as he said to you. He did say it. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So the women just leave, and they're running. They've seen this, but they're not telling anybody. This is amazing. This is crazy. What do you do? You just saw somebody who said Jesus isn't dead anymore. This is where he was. They haven't seen Jesus at that point. It says, starting in verse 9, though, it says, now after he had risen early on the first day of the week, he first appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. Here we see something about Mary. Mary was the one that the demons were cast out of. Here it says 7 demons were cast out of her. Kind of clarifies who she is at this point. And it's the first day of the week. He appears to her. She went and reported to those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. So she goes, finds the disciples and those that had been hanging out around Jesus. They're mourning and weeping. And verse 11, when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they refused to believe it. So, the ladies in general were afraid to tell anybody to start with because, it's kind of a crazy thing. And here, when Mary Magdalene does tell the disciples, they refuse to believe it. Verse 12, and after that he appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking along on their way to the country. Now, those two will get a little more detailed story in Luke chapter 24. It tells of those two and their whole episode with Jesus. Here it just summarizes it by saying that he appeared to a couple more guys. And verse 13, and they went away and reported it to the others, but they did not believe them either. So there's Jesus is appearing to people, but when they report to the disciples, they're like, I don't think so. This is kind of crazy. So verse 14, and afterward he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at the table, and he reproached them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who had seen him after he had risen. So Jesus appears to them finally and says, you should have believed. I understand their unbelief, but I'd rather be the one that just believed. And sometimes maybe you can be naive. You say, don't be so naive, don't be so believing. But here Jesus rebuked them because they weren't believing. It's like, of course, he had told them he was going to rise from the dead. But they didn't understand it. So here we go on to commissioning. And this is interesting. And this is at the end of Matthew, there's a commissioning. We call it the Great Commission. And then at the end of Mark, there's one here too. And there's a little bit of a difference here. In this one, it says in verse 15, he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. He who has believed and has been baptized shall be saved, and he who has disbelieved shall be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who have believed. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will pick up serpents, and if they drink any deadly poison, it shall not hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. The commission here has to do with pretty much the individual. And, what will happen when revival takes place. Believe and be baptized, you'll be saved. These signs will follow. It's all the things that will happen. You'll cast out demons, speak in new tongues, pick up serpents. Lay hands on the sick and they'll recover. At the end of Matthew, so this revolves around pretty much the individual. End of Matthew, he said, "Go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe all I've commanded you." That talks more to kind of like a societal reformation. Here, this is talking about more revivalism, Jesus speaking to the individual and they're revived. The other speaks more to doing something in the nation that transforms a culture. Both of them are important and both of them interlink, but it seems like there's just a little bit different emphasis in these two. And then it says, so then when the Lord Jesus had spoken to them, verse 19, he was received up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. And they went out and preached everywhere while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the word by the signs that followed. And then some translations actually have a little verse after that, which pretty much it's understood that somebody later probably added that. They promptly reported all these instructions to Peter and his companions, and after that Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. That kind of wording is not really used in any other places in the scriptures, and it's generally considered probably an addition that somebody, probably an overzealous monk sometime copying the thing, thought, well, put this in here, it's really cool. And in some translations and some manuscripts, some Greek manuscripts, verses 9 through 20 are not included in there. And so there's a question sometimes, well, should they be in the scriptures? The interesting thing I would say about that, it's hard to tell why it's not in some manuscripts, but some, I guess, like manuscripts were passed through northern Africa, some went to the direction of Europe or whatever, and if somebody had lost part of it or whatever, then it just continues to be passed on like that. But what I would say about verses 9 through 20 is, if they weren't actually in the original manuscripts, they at least, the reason that I would include them in the scriptures here is I think they probably were, but they at least depict what happened in the church at that point. What they describe is what took place. I mean, they went and they preached the gospel, people believed, signs followed, there were demons cast out, Jesus was received up into heaven, sat down at the right hand of God. All of that is what I believe is really true. It's true to basically what happened with the disciples after Jesus left. So it describes, if it wasn't in those original manuscripts, it describes exactly what took place among the disciples after Jesus ascended. So I think it's very valid. I think it does speak to more of the individual transformation, and Matthew speaks to the cultural or maybe what we call Reformation aspect. But we see in these two commissionings at the end of the first two Gospels our edict, our commission, what Jesus has told us to do. And here we've got it real clear. If you don't like this one, go to Matthew. Pretty much the same thing, but we've got them both at the very end of each of these books.